Light is the essence of photography, and with no light, you can't make photos. There are basically two types of light. We call them hard light and soft light. Hard light comes from a seemingly small light source and casts a hard-edged shadow. I say seemingly small because the sun creates a hard light and it's huge. Because it's so far away, the effect is as if it's a small light source. Soft light is created by a light source that's relatively large compared to the subject, or a light source that's somehow diffused. The sun on a cloudy day gives us soft light because it's diffused by the clouds. Now we're going to look at the direction of the light on your subject. You will learn that the direction of the light hitting your subject in relation to your camera position really affects the look and feel of your photograph. Front light is light coming from behind where you stand with your camera and lighting up the front of your subject. It can be easy to get a good exposure with front lighting. Front lighting has one advantage. Metering is usually straightforward. However, it can flatten your subject. Shadows cast by front light fall behind the subject, often out of sight of the camera's point of view. Shadows help give a sense of shape and form to a subject. Without shadows, a subject's shape becomes more ambiguous. Front light lacks drama. When the light is bright, you'll need to take care of using front light when you photograph people. Looking in the direction of a light usually makes people squint, and this is often not a good look in a photograph. Bright light will also create shadows under noses, chins, and in their eye sockets when it's above your subject. Soft front light for portraits is easier to work with. The shadows are not so harsh and people will not be so likely to squint. The aim of this challenge is to learn about taking photos when the light is behind you and illuminating the front of your subject. Preferably you'll need to take the photos for this challenge in the morning or afternoon when the sun is lower in the sky. Outdoors will be best. Choose a subject that can fill about 1/3 of your frame and that you can move around. It will be good to use the same subject for the next few lessons. Stand with your back to the sun or your other light source and make a series of photos of your subject. Have your camera set to program or one of the auto exposure modes, aperture or shutter priority. Key points for this lesson are: the two main categories of light are hard light and soft light. Front light illuminates the front of your subject. Metering is usually easier with front light. In the previous lesson you learned about front lighting. In this lesson, you'll learn about backlighting and how it affects your photos. Backlight comes from behind your subject. The front of your subject will be shaded from the light. It can be challenging to get a good exposure with backlighting because the light will be shining into your lens. You need to use a lens hood if you have one, or shade the front of your lens with your hand to avoid the foggy look of lens flare, unless you want this in your photo. Backlighting semi-translucent subjects like leaves, flowers, flags, etc. can be particularly effective. Smoke and water can look great when backlit. Having ambient light bounce back into the front of your subject when it's backlit can create attractive photographs. Without some additional light affecting the front of your subject, it will be difficult to balance your subject and the light. Sometimes this may be what you want. You need to be aware of how the light is affecting your subject and what your intention for your exposure is. When you have a very strong light source directly behind your subject, it is possible to set your exposure to create a silhouette of your subject. This is best for subjects with a distinct and interesting shape and outline. Light coming directly into your lens from behind your subject can create lens flare. This is sometimes used to help create atmosphere in photos. When I want lens flare in my photos, I always take more pictures than normal. I move slightly with each frame I take, so the amount of flare varies. Then I choose the images that look best when I'm post-processing them. The aim of this challenge is to take some photos with the light behind your subject and to experiment so you can get a pleasing exposure. For today's photos, stand facing the sun on the opposite side of your subject you photographed yesterday, if you're making your pictures at the same time of the day. Have your camera set to program or one of the auto exposure modes, aperture or shutter priority. Make a series of photos from slightly different positions or points of view. In some of the photographs, try and make sure that the sun is coming directly into the lens and creating some lens flare. You may need to use exposure compensation to create a satisfactory exposure. I hope you're beginning to see the difference in light depending on where you position your subject and camera in relation to the light source. Backlighting can be challenging to get right, but when you do, the results can be fabulous. Key points for this lesson are: backlight comes from behind your subject. The front of your subject will be shaded from the light. Light coming directly into your lens from behind your subject will create lens flare. Light falling on the side of your subject will create a different look and feel for a photo than either front or back lighting does. With side lighting, your whole subject will not be evenly lit. Some will be in the light and other parts will be shaded. This is more obvious when you're photographing in hard light and the shadows are strong. Making use of the shadows when your subject is lit from the side can create some dramatic effects. Side light will help give your subject a greater appearance of depth. With the right subjects, side lighting can evoke feeling and mystery. Side lighting also brings out texture in your subject more than front or back lighting will. Because your subject is not evenly lit by side lighting, you need to be careful with your exposure settings. You will need to choose if you want the side of your subject affected by the light to be well exposed or the shadow area to be well exposed. Using side lighting when taking portraits, be careful of how your subject's face is angled in relation to the light. Look carefully at the shadows on their face. Asking them to turn their face slowly in one direction and then the other, you can look to see when the shadows will look the best. Even in open shade, when the light is fairly soft, you can notice the difference in exposure between the side of your subject that's closer to the light source than the other. Using your spot meter, you can check the exposure difference of the light and the shadow areas. The aim of this challenge is to take photos of a subject where the light is coming from the side and see how much different it looks than front or back lighting. Position yourself so you can see that the light is hitting the side of your subject and create a series of photos. Have your camera set to program or one of the auto exposure modes, aperture or shutter priority. Move slightly to the left and to the right as you're making your series of photos and watch how your point of view changes what you see. If you can turn your subject, experiment with this too. Stand in the same position and turn your subject and watch what the light and shadows are doing. As you did in the challenge for the previous lesson, experiment with exposure compensation and bracketing. Don't forget to make good notes about what you're doing and what you're observing. Learning to see the light and get a feeling for how it affects your photo is a big part of learning to be a creative photographer. So far, I've encouraged you to take photos using any of the auto exposure modes on your camera. Key points for this lesson are: with side lighting, your whole subject will not be evenly lit. Make good use of shadows with side light.